Hello and welcome to the Blindseyepodcast, the podcast discussing everything you did and didn't want to know about being blind. My name is Connor, and today we're going to be doing part two of my accessible travel story, basically. So last week I was talking about a company called TravelEyes that I found. Some of the times I tried to travel and it was a bit of a hit and miss, and then finding TravelEyes, which kind of opened it up and I guess, built a little bit of independence. So if you haven't listened to that, I highly encourage you to go back to last week's one and listen to it. And last week, I went to San Francisco. That was my first time away. And this week, we are going to be discussing Berlin, which was my second time going away with TravelEyes and was a completely different setup to the first. And I guess the reason why that's relevant is because both had their unique challenges as far as I was concerned with independence and accessibility. So I thought it would be good to show both sides of the coin and the different things that needed to come into place and all the ducks that needed to be lined up in a row. As usual, disclaimer, just my thoughts, opinions, experiences, very much my own. Okay, so last week, I ended up leaving it to when I got back to Sydney from San Francisco. So, anyway, a year has passed and another trip has come up on the TravelEyes website for Berlin. But the trip is for 4 days. And this is basically because the company is European. So, it's a lot easier for European companies to do little darts off to other parts of Europe just for a couple of days because everybody is so close to each other in Europe. But that kind of creates an interesting dilemma if you are from another part of the world and you want to see different parts of Europe and you're not already there. So for me, I've always wanted to go to Germany and I saw Berlin and I wanted to go. And even though it was 4 days, I booked it straight away. Now, my next thing was trying to work out how do I make Europe worth my while and not just go for 4 days. I'm not going to travel all the way from Sydney to Germany for 4 days just to turn right back around and come home. So I looked at the idea of maybe joining a couple of other groups while I was there because there's always multiple TravelEyes groups running. But also, I have family members who live in Ireland and in England. So basically what I ended up doing was I booked the Berlin trip and then I decided to go to Ireland to visit my immediate family, basically 2.5 weeks either side of that holiday. So instead of me having to fly into Berlin from Sydney and fly back to Sydney from Berlin, I flew into Dublin, spent a couple of weeks with my family, then flew from Dublin to Berlin, and then would fly from Berlin back to Dublin for another couple of weeks and then go back to Sydney. So in my mind, that made a lot more sense than, going all the way around the world for such a short amount of time. So anyway, when I'm in Ireland, I'm with my family, so, I can get around with the assistance of them. It's, yes, again, it's not exactly independent because I can't just take off and do what I'd like to the same degree, but it's not really an issue. But when I go to Berlin, I get the plane and I'm going. And when I get to the airport in Berlin, I get handed over to the ground staff, and which was really neat. They kind of bring this hydraulic truck up to the plane, and then they raise the cabin of the truck right up in line with the actual plane door. And then you just walk right onto this truck and they just lower back down and drive it away. So I think it's for people maybe who might be in wheelchairs or who can't do the steps and stuff like that in the plane or to get down onto the tarmac. But anyway, so they brought me into the airport, which is tiny for Berlin because, it's a one of the world's capital cities. So I'm kind of imagining this massive sprawling airport, but it's not, basically just to do with like the Cold War and the political things that went on there for years. But anyway, so I got handed over to this lady who was going to help me find my baggage. Now, this is where the fun started. So, I was kind of walking with her. I was holding her elbow, and she was saying to me in very broken English, "What?" She was saying, "What color? What color?" And I was like, "What are you talking about? No idea what you're talking about." And she's saying, "What color? What color?" Because that's all she can say. And every now and then I can hear that she's getting a phone out, so I don't know if she's looking at a translation app or a phonetic dictionary or whatever. But she's saying, "What color? What color?" And then eventually I hear the baggage carousels and think, she probably means what color is my bag. Now, because I had been in Ireland, I had, 6 weeks worth of gear with me, and I didn't want to take 6 weeks worth of gear to Berlin for 4 days just to lug it back. So I actually borrowed one of my family members' little suitcases, and I had no idea what color it was, apart from the fact that it was black. So I said to her, "Oh, black." And she said to me, "Blau?" And I was like, I don't know. I just kind of shrugged my shoulders at her because I didn't know, did Blau mean, is it Blau German for black? I don't really know. So, and then she was starting to get quite unhappy because obviously she'd been palmed off to this person, and she was like, "How am I going to help this guy?" And I couldn't really explain to her what the bag looked like, even if there wasn't a language barrier there. In hindsight, I probably should have taken a photo of the bag or something so I could show her a photo of it on my phone. But anyway, I didn't. And I kind of fell into that trap of thinking, like, most people in Europe speak English. So in my mind, I was like, well, surely somebody in an international airport would definitely speak English in Europe. But anyway, so we're there for about 40 minutes and she's getting more and more annoyed, and she's muttering under her breath, and she's going, "Oh mein Gott, oh mein Gott." So we all know what that means. And I was just trying to not basically piss myself laughing because I just found it very funny. And it's weird because that first time I went to San Francisco, if this had happened, I probably would have freaked. And I probably would have thought, "Oh my God, what am I doing here? I'm out of my depth." But for some reason, I was there and I was like, this is what traveling is all about. This is just hilarious. What a great story. So we were there, and then they managed to get somebody else who spoke English to come and help me out and help us out. And then so eventually found the bag, and the ladies who were helping us out left me and the original lady to go. And I just said, "Taxi, taxi, taxi," thinking, surely she knows what a taxi is. So we started walking, and again, I was just trying not to laugh, and the whole time she's muttering under her breath, "Oh mein Gott, oh mein Gott." And anyway, as we get out to the taxi rank, she's kind of helping me get into the taxi, and she's muttering under her breath, she's gone, "Catastrophia." And I was almost in tears just because it was so funny. And anyway, so we got into the taxi, and I told him where the hotel was, and anyway, it was probably about a 20-minute trip. And when we got there, I was actually the first person there, so I was under the impression the rest of the group that was flying in were already going to be there, and inadvertently I had walked straight past them in the terminal, and I'd just been on my way. So I got to the hotel first, and I was like, it was a massive lobby, and I was in the lobby kind of out of the way of where the staff were, and I was like, I guess I'll just try and find a seat. So I was like poking around with my cane to see if I could find a seat. And I just sat there, and then for an hour or so, and then this lady's like, "Are you in the TravelEyes group?" And I said, "Yeah." And she's like, "Oh, I'm one of the sighted travelers. My name's Laura." So then her and I basically just hung out, got to know each other until the rest of the main body came, and everything was good. But yeah, it was definitely an interesting way to arrive on your first night. I didn't make the same mistake this time, so this time I made sure to just get my own room from the beginning, which ended up being a much better, smoother, more pleasant idea. So I learned my lesson. So when we got together in our group the next morning, we had 18 people plus the tour guide. So it was automatically bigger than what happened in America. And also in America, we were on a mixture of public transport, walking around, but we also had our own bus for quite a stretch of the holiday. Whereas in Berlin, Berlin's just quite a flat, wide, sprawling city, and it just made more sense really to walk and to catch the underground metro system. And also, the tour guide was trying to, save us money by us not catching taxis everywhere. But none of us really realized just how wide and sprawling of a city it is. I think in the 4 days we worked out that we walked about 15 miles a day. So what? That's more than 40 kilometers all up. And I live 40 kilometers away from the coastline here in Sydney, so I could have walked to the beach from my house, and that was just all the walking we did, and that's just what we had to do. And yeah, it was kind of hard at times, or it takes its toll, but we were trying to pack so much into a 4-day holiday to make it worth our while. We met this tour guide who was going to be showing us around for a couple of hours, and she brought us to this really awesome place called Museum Island. Now, Museum Island is an island in the middle of the River Spree, which is the main river that runs through Berlin. And this island was basically called Museum Island just out of practicality because there's like 5 or 6 different museums on it, and they're like 150 years old, something like that. So we went there, but what's really interesting about this place is that it was the site of a major skirmish during World War II. So there's all this kind of stone archways and stuff like that, but there's these massive holes in the stone from like 50 caliber machine gun bullets that have smacked into it when they were obviously trying to storm the island. And you can feel them. So, some of us were like, well, why would we go to a museum? Like, some museums are very visual. Some of them are more tactile nowadays, but some are very visual. It's, what's the deal? So, but we went there, and you could just feel like just hundreds and hundreds of machine gun pockmarks that were just everywhere. And for me, like, I'm a big history buff, so for me, it was kind of like, holy crap, this is the place where a lot of big stuff in world history, like modern world history, went down. After that, the tour guide said, okay, we're going to be going to a car park. And a few of the group were like, why the hell are we going to a car park? And, not to sound like a know-it-all, but I had an inkling what this place was. And so we went there, and it's this car park, kind of nondescript, there's no bells and whistles. But what it is below this car park is where Hitler's bunker was, where he shot himself at the end of the war. So it's purposely been built kind of in a nondescript way because they don't want it to become a shrine for him. They don't want... they just want to avoid any potential issues. But it's really weird because, yes, it's a car park, and it's kind of, in that way, it's sort of, meh and mediocre. But at the same time, you're there, and 10 meters under your feet is where one of the most evil dudes in history put a bullet in his brain to end World War II, which killed 60 million people. And again, as a history nut, I just found it very overwhelming, I guess. Overwhelming is probably not the right word, but it really impacted me, kind of realizing that, this place that I'd heard about my whole life, or these events that, you get taught in school and from a child about, the world wars and all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden I was standing here in these places. And for some people, maybe it wasn't their cup of tea, but for me, that alone was enough to make me kind of go like, okay, wow, this is history. After that, I believe we went to the headquarters of the SS, and that's been turned into a museum of basically the SS crimes. And that again was really interesting and confronting, but it was done quite well because, in museums, a lot of times you go in and there's lots of stuff to read, but there was a really great balance of things you could read, things you could listen to, but also having a tour guide there explaining what it was that you were looking at and giving you different contexts and perspectives that you may not have considered before. And it was just, again, like, you're in this really infamous place, but it was done in a way that I felt I was really able to get a lot out of it as somebody who couldn't see. There's also this neat thing that a lot of cities are starting to do. I haven't really seen them in Australia, but I noticed it a little bit in America, and I noticed it definitely in Berlin, that at tourist attractions, they kind of have a 3D scale model of what it is you're visiting. And it's very well detailed, and it's just on a table. So you can just feel what it is that you're actually at and get an idea for the size of it and how it was created. So last week when we went to Alcatraz, I was explaining, like, you can feel the island. It's on a little table before you go out to Alcatraz. You can feel the prison, how it's arranged, stuff like that. And the same in Berlin. We went to what was the Reichstag building, which is now the Bundestag building. And obviously the Reichstag is very famous. And you go into a room there and there's a scale model of the building that you're in. And you can feel the little balconies where, peace treaties were announced to the world, or, where events in the Cold War started and stopped. And you can get an idea rather than just being in this thing and kind of not having a concept of the building or the infrastructure or the architecture. You can feel it for yourself and know what's what. While we were actually in Berlin, the tour guide, in his wisdom, great dude, but he thought it would be great for us just take in the German cuisine all the time. So we were basically only going to sort of Bavarian style old traditional restaurants, which is basically just all pork and cabbage mostly. Mostly that's what's on offer. So that was interesting. That it's not probably exactly what I wanted, but also you're there and you're trying to take in as much as you can, and it worked. But if I never see another cabbage or pork again, I'll be fine. We also went to one of the still standing sections of the Berlin Wall, and I wasn't really quite sure what was going to happen there because a lot of these places need to be preserved and stuff, but we were actually able to touch the wall. And the tour guide that was with us, he said, right, put your cane up. So basically I put my cane up on the wall, on the Berlin Wall, just to try and get an idea of how tall this thing was. And I stretched as far as I could, and he said to me, you're about 3/4 of the way up the height of the wall. So I was able to give, myself an idea. Like, I'm about 6 foot tall. The cane in my hand is probably 5 foot, 4 foot tall. My arm's probably another 1.5 feet. So, and by that, it was still probably 3/4 of the way up the wall. So it was able to give me an idea of just how massive this thing was and what kind of an impenetrable object that it was in the city of Berlin during the Cold War. Now, the two last things that I'll talk about, just to wrap it up, are completely different in tone to each other, but we went to the Holocaust Memorial, and interestingly, the Holocaust Memorial is about 100 yards from the car park where Hitler's bunker was buried beneath. And I actually asked the tour guide, like, was this done on purpose? And she said, look, we're in the middle of Berlin. Basically everywhere is close to everywhere. So it's not necessarily done for any kind of like gotcha reasons. It's just you're in the center of the city, so you're kind of going to be close to other major buildings. But anyway, so we went to this place and it's done really, really interesting. So the best way I can explain it is there's like a forest of square pylons. I think there's about 2,000 of them, and I forget, but the 2,000 represents something. It's a significant number, and they are all leveled off at the top, so they're all the same height, but they are placed in an area that descends down into the middle. So basically, as you step into the memorial, you have these little blocks that are, down around your ankles, and as you walk, the ground slopes and the pylons start to rise on either side of you. So you're walking down the alleyways between all the pylons, and the further and further you go into it, the more they start to loom over you, and some of them actually start to angle in over the top of you, so they're not exactly straight up in the air. And before you know it, you're kind of surrounded. And it's kind of meant to represent sort of like a creeping sense of isolation. So it's supposed to represent how quickly a society or a people can go from being included to being surrounded on all sides by this kind of intimidating force that's very suffocating. And even as you get further down into the memorial, you can't even really hear the city sounds anymore because it's blocking it out. So not only is it pressing in on all sides and it's kind of overbearing, but you're not even able to hear in the same way. And it's just the symbolism of it was just so well done, but it was done in a way that I was really able to experience. Even though I couldn't see it, I could feel it. And it was just really amazing to me, and obviously, a very important, memorial. But just the way that it was done was specifically, I found it done in a way that I was able to take a lot out of it, because I was able to grasp what it is the designer was going for. And underneath that, there's like an actual memorial, and it's kind of pretty messed up, because in the memorial you have a museum, and you have to basically go through airport levels of security to get in there, because they're afraid of sort of reprisals and neo-Nazis who might take their revenge. And they only allow 8 people in at a time, so they don't get rushed. And again, for me, it kind of just brought home the fact that you're like, okay, you're in this place and has a lot of history, but a lot of the history isn't exactly finished history. And yeah, that was quite well, I wouldn't say a good, because there's nothing good about it, but it was something that I was really glad I was able to experience and take in, because I wasn't sure what I was going to be able to take in. Now, on some time we had off, which kind of just really symbolized to me the whole quirkiness of Berlin, because it's a very hodgepodge. Like, in some places very old, and in some places it's quite camp and cliched, and in others it's very alternative and edgy and progressive. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of everything. And anyway, so one day we'd heard about this pool that was supposed to have like a bar next to the pool, and we're like, okay, it's really hot, let's go there. And somehow we ended up walking down an industrial area, and so there's people using angle grinders and all this kind of stuff, and we were like, where the fuck are we? And we turned this corner, and there's a security guard there just standing in front of this alleyway, and we're like, why is there a security guard here? And then behind the security guard, you can kind of see a pool off in the distance. So basically what had happened was this industrial area runs along the river, and then you stumble across the pool, which is kind of like a hidden secret, and it has decking around it, and you pay some money to go in, and you can buy alcohol or whatever you want while you're there, and you're just sort of listening. But the pool is actually, it's kind of like a barge that's in the middle of the main river, the Spree that I was telling you about. And so you're basically in a pool in the middle of a river in the middle of a city, and there's decking all around you where you can just kind of have a drink. But, you can essentially swim to the side of the pool, put your hand over the edge, and your hand's in the river. And it was just very weird, but very cool, because you're like, we found this by walking through an industrial area, and there's a security guard for some reason, and you couldn't get into the pool without having a shower first, because they want to try and keep it as clean, because it has barely any salt in it. It's mostly fresh water, so they want to make sure that you're clean before you get in. And when you buy your drinks, you have to give like a €5 sort of security bond, and then if you bring all your glasses back, they'll give you back your €5 security bond. So it kind of encourages you to do the right thing. And just everything about it was kind of quirky and not stuff I'd really seen before. But again, it was just something that I really, really loved, and I wouldn't have gotten if I just stayed in Sydney. So thankfully, getting back to the airport and all that was pretty easy, because I went with everybody else. Annoyingly, in Berlin airport, most airports have like one security checkout, like one security screening you need to get through before you get to all the gates. Whereas in Berlin airport, different sections of the terminal have different amounts of gates. So I had to go to another end of the terminal, and I wanted to spend as much time with all these new friends that I'd made. And we had to try to work out, well, how was I going to go with them as far as I could, but also get myself to the right part of the airport, because there was all these security gates in the way because of the setup they have. So basically what ended up happening was me and the tour guide went to the security gate nearest to my gate, and he said, look, if you just walk through on your own, he said, I'll call you and I'll be able to see you in the distance, and I will try and walk you to your gate because I can see it off in the distance. So basically I went through passport control and security, and then he called me on WhatsApp, and he's like, yep, keep going straight. Okay, yep, no, there's a person there to your left, there's a person there. All right, no, you come up to seats now. Yeah, this is the seat you want. So he walked me probably about 50 meters just by phone communication, because he was off in the distance because he couldn't get through. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to get back to his own flight. So, it's one of those things. Again, if that had happened in San Francisco, or if I had heard about that before I'd gone on any of these trips, it would have terrified me. That would have been enough to make me go, I'm not going on that. But it was one of those things that I learned that 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, things work out. You might need to approach them in a different way. You might need to, get creative, or they even might not really go as planned. But, most times you're not going to get murdered and your kidneys aren't going to get stolen, So, yeah, and that was really important for me, because not only did it mean I have a nice holiday, but also just for me personally, it kind of proved to myself that these doubts that I had about what could I do as somebody who was an adult who couldn't see. And it kind of proved to me that, well, generally you can find a way. It's just, you might not get there in the most pain-free, straightforward, comfortable way, but you'll get there, and it's still worth going through that, mess around, because you can still have an awesome holiday like I had in both those, scenarios. Now, the last thing I'll say, just to kind of wrap up these 2 episodes, was for me, finding TravelEyes opened up a part of my life that I didn't really think was possible. So just the amount of, I guess, liberation or independence I found. I mean, yeah, I'm still walking around cities, sighted guide, holding on to people or whatever, but I thought I was going to be beholden to what everybody else felt like doing in my life. I thought it was going to be, well, do my friends want to go to the same places I want to go? No. Okay, well, I guess I won't go. And now that's not an issue, and I can go, and I wasn't treated like I was a disabled case that needed caring. I was just a person who found it hard to see, who was in a city with other travelers, some of whom have become really good friends. And, I'm sure they were in the same position. They were like, how intense is this going to be? And I think we all walked away going, okay, this was a lot easier than we expected. And I can just never really thank businesses like TravelEyes and others who do it, because it just opens a door that a lot of people who are blind or who have disabilities or whatever think that is closed to them, or that only opens if somebody else, agrees or something like that. So for me, it just meant that I was able to be an adult and do all these other things that friends of mine and peers were doing. So, I'll definitely be going once this stupid pandemic's over and things go back to some amount of normal. I'll definitely be keeping my eyes peeled, because it's just given me an option now and sort of lit a fire under my ass, which I'm quite happy for. So anyway, that was this week's. I hope those two parts were interesting, not too dragged out. I hope some of the, conversation about where I went and what I did was interesting. I know it's probably a bit of blowing smoke up my ass about, because, everybody likes talking about the holidays, but I thought it was interesting to show it from a blind or non-sighted perspective. As usual, you can get in touch with me by emailing blindseyepodcast@gmail.com. That's BLINDSEYE podcast@gmail.com. You can tweet the show at Blindseyepod, and you can find me on Facebook if you search for Blindseye Podcast. And I will be back with a new topic next week. Cheers.